A few months ago, a friend of mine confessed something over coffee that I know a lot of us wouldn't dare say out loud. She leaned in and whispered, "I'm 40 years old, and I have no idea how to make new friends." She laughed like it was a joke, but I could see the ache just underneath the surface. And I get it, because I've been there. We don't talk about it much, but making friends as an adult, it can feel awkward, vulnerable, sometimes even impossible. And if you've ever wondered, is it just me? Let me tell you right now, it's not. In fact, research shows that after our mid-20s, the number of friends we have starts to shrink. Not because we stop caring, but because life happens. Careers, family, responsibilities, they all take up space. And somewhere along the way, we stop prioritizing connection the way we used to. But here's the thing, we are wired for connection. It's in our biology. Loneliness isn't just an emotional ache, it's a signal, like hunger or thirst, telling us that we need each other. And yet the very thing we crave, belonging, can feel the hardest to reach for. Why? Because putting ourselves out there is vulnerable. And vulnerability, it's never easy, but it's where the magic happens. So why does making friends as an adult feel so hard? And more importantly, what can we do about it? Well, there are 5 things that stand in the way. And the good news, once we see them clearly, we can start doing something about them. Life gets busy and friendship becomes optional. As adults, nobody hands us a built-in social circle like they did when we were kids. Remember those days? You sat next to someone in class, shared your crayons, and boom, you were friends. It was easy because our lives were naturally structured around opportunities to connect. But as we get older, things shift. Work deadlines pile up, family responsibilities grow, and the casual, organic moments where friendship used to blossom, they become rare. I've heard people say if someone really wants to stay in your life, they will. And while that sounds nice on a throw pillow, it's not how real life works. Most of us aren't sitting around rejecting invitations. We're just busy, overwhelmed, and if we're honest, a little tired. And when life feels full, friendship quietly slides to the bottom of the list. Not because we don't care, but because everything else feels urgent. And here's the sneaky thing. We tell ourselves that friendship should be easy. We assume if a connection is meant to be, it will just happen. But real friendship, the kind that lasts, isn't effortless. It's intentional. It requires us to reach out, follow up, and sometimes be the one who initiates again. And that can feel heavy when your to-do list already feels like it's about to topple over. But here's the part no one tells you. The very thing we push aside when we're busy, connection, is the thing that helps us carry the weight of our lives. When people say, "I don't have time to invest in friendships," what I hear is I'm running on empty. Because the truth is, meaningful connection doesn't drain us, it fills us. We're not meant to do life alone, and research backs this up. Studies show that strong social ties improve everything from mental health to physical well-being. People with deep friendships report feeling less stressed, more resilient, and get this, even live longer. But there's another side to that research that doesn't get talked about enough. Loneliness is as damaging to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Let that sink in. We weren't built to navigate life in isolation, but we've somehow normalized the idea that adult friendships are a bonus, not a necessity. I get it. When life is full, reaching out can feel like one more thing to manage. But here's what I know for sure. Small, intentional acts of connection matter more than you think. It doesn't take grand gestures or hours of free time. It's a quick text saying, "Hey, I thought of you." It's inviting someone to grab coffee, even if your house is a mess and your calendar is chaotic. It's choosing to send that message even when your brain whispers, "They're probably too busy." I had a friend once who was going through an incredibly tough season. I knew she was struggling, but I also knew she had a busy career and a family to take care of. And I'll be honest, I hesitated. I thought, she doesn't need one more person asking how she's doing, but eventually I sent a simple message, no need to respond. "I'm just here if you want to talk." You know what she told me months later? It wasn't the big gestures or perfectly timed conversations that made the biggest difference. It was that one text. It reminded her she wasn't alone. And that's the thing about connection. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be present. And here's the good news. You don't need hours of free time or a perfectly organized life to build meaningful friendships. What you need is intention. And intention looks like choosing connection, even when it's inconvenient. It's being willing to reach out, follow up, and show up, not just when life is easy, but especially when it's not. Because here's the truth. Loneliness doesn't wait for your schedule to clear up. And connection, it's always worth the effort. Fear of rejection holds us back. And let's be honest, rejection, it stings. It's that punch in the gut feeling that whispers, see, you never should have tried. And here's the thing, none of us are immune to it. You can be the most confident, capable person in the room, and the idea of putting yourself out there, whether it's asking someone to grab coffee or inviting them into your world, can still make your heart race. I remember reaching out to someone I really admired. We'd had a few good conversations and I thought maybe we could be friends. So I sent a message, simple, casual, nothing dramatic. And you know what happened? Silence. Nothing. And I did what most of us do. I filled that silence with a whole story. They don't really like you. You're too much. You tried too hard. Sound familiar? That's what fear does. It doesn't just point to a moment. It builds a narrative. And those narratives, they shape how we show up. Over time, it becomes easier to play it safe, to wait for the other person to reach out first, to tell yourself you're too busy, when really you're just trying to avoid the possibility of hearing no. And I get it. We've all had those moments, the friendship that faded without explanation, the texts that went unanswered, the time you showed up vulnerably and were met with indifference. And it's easy, almost instinctive to tell yourself, I'm not doing that again. But here's the problem. When we let the fear of rejection call the shots, we don't just avoid pain, we also cut ourselves off from the very thing we crave, real, meaningful connection. The truth is, you can't have friendship without risk. You can't have belonging without vulnerability. And yes, that means you will at some point experience rejection. But here's the part that's easy to forget. Rejection isn't a reflection of your worth. It's not a verdict on how lovable or interesting or valuable you are. More often than not, it's about timing. It's about capacity. And sometimes it's not even about you. And there's research to back this up. Studies show that we consistently overestimate how much people will judge us if we reach out and they're not interested. In reality, most people are more open and receptive than we think. We assume that inviting someone in is a burden, but more often it's a gift. People are lonelier than ever. And sometimes your invitation is the thing they didn't even realize they needed. I've learned something powerful over the years. Connection doesn't belong to the people who never get rejected. It belongs to the ones who are willing to try, who reach out even when it feels risky, who remind themselves if it doesn't work out, that's not the end of the story, because it's not. I had a conversation recently with someone who said, I want deeper friendships, but I'm tired of being the one who always makes the first move, and I understand that exhaustion. It's vulnerable to be the initiator, to extend your hand without a guarantee that someone will take it. But here's the question I asked. What's the alternative? Because waiting, staying safe might protect you from rejection, but it also keeps you from the joy of belonging. And if there's one thing I know for sure, it's this. You cannot experience real connection without a little courage. And courage, it's not about pretending you're not afraid. It's about showing up even with shaky hands and trusting that the possibility of connection is worth the risk. So send the text, make the call, extend the invitation, not because it's easy, but because you're willing to believe that connection is worth it. Because at the end of the day, the biggest risk isn't rejection, it's living a life where you never let yourself be fully seen, and you deserve more than that. We assume everyone else is too busy, but people want to be invited in. And isn't that the story we tell ourselves, that everyone else already has their people, that their lives are full, their schedules are packed, And the last thing they need is us barging in with an invitation. And it's so easy to believe that because, let's face it, we're busy too. We know what it's like to feel stretched thin, to juggle work, family, and the endless to-do list. So we assume everyone else must feel the same way. And instead of reaching out, we hold back. But here's the truth that surprised me when I first came across it. Most people are lonelier than they let on. Research shows that we consistently underestimate how much others enjoy being invited in. Let that sink in for a minute. We assume that people don't have the time or space for connection, but the reality is, most people are longing for it, and not in some vague, abstract way. They want to be seen, they want to be included, they want to feel like they matter to someone. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, I didn't want to bother anyone. And if you've ever thought that, I get it. We tell ourselves, if they wanted to talk, they'd reach out. If they wanted to spend time with me, they'd make the first move. But here's the thing, so many people are sitting on the other side of that same thought, waiting for someone else to take the first step. And what happens? Nothing. Two people who would probably love to connect stay in their separate corners because each one assumes the other is too busy or too uninterested. I had a conversation recently with a woman who told me that she hadn't heard from a close friend in months. She missed her, but figured she's probably too busy with work and family. Finally, she sent a quick message, just a simple, hey, I miss you, let's catch up soon. You know what her friend said? I thought you were too busy for me. Both of them had been waiting, each one wanting connection, but each one afraid to reach out. And here's the part that really matters. Reaching out doesn't have to be some grand, perfectly orchestrated gesture. In fact, the smallest acts of connection often mean the most. It's sending a quick, I saw this and thought of you. It's inviting someone to grab a coffee or go for a walk. It's simply letting someone know they're on your mind. And those little things, they add up. Because when you reach out, you're not just extending an invitation. You're sending a message that says, you matter to me. And there are very few things in this world more powerful than that. But I also know this. Reaching out feels vulnerable. It's easier to stay safe, to convince yourself that if people wanted you in their life, they'd already be there. But the truth is, friendship doesn't usually work that way. Most people aren't sitting around rejecting connection. They're just waiting for someone to go first. And here's the good news. You can be that person. You can be the one who takes the first step, who sends the first message, who says, I'd really love to spend time with you. And does that feel risky? Absolutely. But the alternative, waiting and wondering, usually feels worse. And here's what I've learned. Most people aren't as busy or as closed off as you think. Most people would be thrilled to receive an invitation, to know that someone thought of them. So if you've been hesitating, if there's someone you've been meaning to reach out to, this is your nudge. Don't wait until your schedule is wide open. Don't wait until the timing feels perfect. Just reach out, because you never know, your invitation might be exactly what they were hoping for. Old stories keep us stuck, and if you've ever told yourself, I'm just not good at making friends, you know exactly what I mean. Those stories, they're sneaky. They don't announce themselves loudly. They show up in the quiet moments when you think about reaching out, but then you remember the time you weren't invited. When you want to ask someone to grab coffee, but hear that voice whisper, why would they want to spend time with you? And these stories, whether we realize it or not, shape how we show up in relationships. If you've spent years believing you're not the kind of person people want to be friends with, you're probably not rushing to send that text or extend that invitation. Not because you don't want connection, but because the story has convinced you it's safer not to try. And here's the tricky part. Most of these stories, they didn't start with us. They came from somewhere. Maybe you were the kid who never quite fit in. Maybe there was a friendship that ended without an explanation and it left you wondering what you did wrong. Or maybe you've always felt like an outsider, like everyone else got the manual for belonging and you somehow missed it. Whatever the source, those experiences get woven into our identity, and over time we start to confuse those stories with truth. But here's what I know. Just because a story feels true doesn't mean it is true. And when we don't question those stories, we let them define us, we carry them into every new relationship, We assume rejection before it happens, and we pull back not because people don't want to connect with us, but because we've already decided how the story ends. I'll never forget a conversation I had with a man who told me I've always been the odd one out. He'd believed that story for decades, and every time a new friendship showed promise, he'd find a reason to pull away. Because deep down, he thought, why get close if they're going to leave anyway? And I asked him, what if that story isn't true? What if you've always belonged, but you never let yourself believe it? And I think that's a question worth asking ourselves. What if the stories we've been telling aren't the whole truth? What if, instead of assuming we're unworthy of connection, we started to question those old narratives? And this isn't just wishful thinking, it's backed by research. Neuroscience tells us that our brains are wired to look for patterns. Once we believe a particular story, whether it's I'm not lovable or I always mess things up, our brains go to work collecting evidence to support it. And here's the kicker. We also ignore the evidence that contradicts it. If you believe you're not good at making friends, you might brush off an invitation as a fluke instead of seeing it for what it is, someone wanting to connect with you. But the beautiful thing about stories, we can rewrite them. And that starts by getting curious. The next time you catch yourself thinking, I'm not the kind of person people want to be friends with, ask yourself, is that actually true? Or is that just an old story trying to protect me from being hurt? And look, I'm not saying this is easy. Rewriting old stories takes practice. It means catching those thoughts when they show up and gently reminding yourself, I'm worthy of connection. I'm worthy of belonging. And sometimes it means doing the exact thing the story tells you not to do. Reaching out, following up, staying open. Because here's what I've learned. When you start challenging those old stories, everything shifts. You begin to see yourself differently. You stop assuming rejection. And you create space for the kind of connection you've been craving all along. And maybe the most powerful truth is this: you are not your old stories, and you get to decide right here, right now, that they don't get to write the ending. We expect friendships to just happen, and that's part of the problem. Somewhere along the way, we bought into this idea that friendship should be effortless, that if the connection is real, it shouldn't take work. And while that might be true when you're a kid, when friendship is as easy as sitting next to someone at lunch, adulthood is different. Our lives get more complicated. We have jobs, families, responsibilities pulling us in every direction. And yet so many of us still carry this quiet belief that friendship should unfold naturally, without planning, without effort, without intention. But here's the truth. Meaningful friendships don't just happen. They are built deliberately, over time, through consistent, intentional effort. And I know that doesn't sound glamorous. It's not the stuff of movies where friendships blossom effortlessly over shared laughter and spontaneous adventures. Real friendship? It's showing up. It's sending the text. It's making time when everything in your schedule says you don't have any. And I get it. It's easy to feel discouraged when friendship doesn't happen organically. I hear people say it all the time. It shouldn't be this hard. If we were meant to be friends, wouldn't it just work? But what if we let go of that idea? What if we stopped expecting friendship to be easy and started accepting that it's something we cultivate? Because the people who have deep, lasting friendships aren't the ones who stumbled into them by accident. They're the ones who decided that connection was worth prioritizing. And there's research to back this up. Studies show that it takes about 50 hours of time together to turn an acquaintance into a casual friend, and 200 hours to become close friends. That's not magic, that's intention. And when you think about it, it makes sense. Trust, familiarity, and real connection, they all require repeated experiences over time. You can't rush it, and you definitely can't wait around hoping it will fall into your lap. And here's something else we don't talk about enough. Effort doesn't mean there's something wrong with the friendship. It doesn't mean you're trying too hard or forcing something that isn't real. It simply means you're investing in something that matters. When we let go of the myth that friendship should be effortless, we free ourselves to actually do the work of building relationships. And that work it's worth it. I was talking to someone recently who said, I miss having the kind of friendships I had in college where we just did life together. And I understand that longing. But here's what I told her. Those friendships didn't happen by accident. You had proximity on your side. You saw each other daily. You shared experiences without even thinking about it. And as adults, we lose that automatic closeness. If we want deep friendships, we have to create the conditions for them. We have to be intentional. And I know we're all busy, life moves fast, but when we tell ourselves we don't have time for friendship, what we're really saying is it's not a priority. And I think we need to ask ourselves, is that true? Because at the end of the day, no one's schedule magically clears itself. We make time for what matters. And if connection matters, and I believe it does, we have to be willing to treat it like any other important part of life. And here's where I want to challenge you. What would it look like to be more intentional about friendship? Maybe it's putting a standing coffee date on the calendar. Maybe it's checking in with someone regularly, not just when it's convenient. Maybe it's choosing to reach out even when you're tired because you know relationships are built in those small, consistent moments. Because here's the bottom line, friendships that last don't happen by accident. They happen when we decide they're worth the effort. And that decision, it's always in our hands. At the heart of it all, friendship isn't about luck or timing. It's about courage. The courage to reach out when it feels easier to hold back. The courage to challenge the old stories that tell us we're not enough. The courage to be intentional, even when life feels too busy. And maybe most importantly, the courage to let people in, to let them see us, know us, and walk alongside us. Because here's what I believe. We are wired for connection. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. And while making friends as an adult might feel harder, it's also more meaningful. You get to choose your people. You get to invest in relationships that nourish you. And when you're willing to show up imperfectly but wholeheartedly, friendship isn't just possible, it's inevitable. So if you've been waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect invitation, the perfect friend, I want to invite you to stop waiting. Be the one who goes first. Reach out, stay open, and trust that there are people out there who need exactly what you have to offer. And who knows, that one small act of courage could be the beginning of a friendship that changes everything. Good luck. You've got this.